I think that the most beautiful thing about world literature and the vast number of translations of all these works that would have been inaccessible to us 100 years ago, the benefit of that is that we get to experience the thoughts, the social mores, and the issues that were prevalent in societies at that time. Some prominent ones that come to mind are Dostoevsky in his Russian literature, or Gabriel Garcia Marquez in his Latin American magical realism literature. These are prolific authors, respected the world over for the goodness of their work. But I think that this intellectual nomadic way of life where we, constantly look externally for good literature, if taken too far, can be quite misleading and can almost be alienating and make you feel, spiritually homeless. And so that's prompted me to read a lot of American literature lately. And being a Southerner by birth and multiple generations, I'm talking, a couple hundred years, if the records on Ancestry and that one great aunt of mine are to be validated and true. Um, I hadn't really delved into Southern literature before. I had, read To Kill a Mockingbird in high school, like everybody does, and read The Scarlet Letter. I know that's from the Northeast, but, my experience of American literature to that point was To Kill a Mockingbird in high school. And then I had tried Hemingway a couple months back, and honestly, I couldn't get into it. But I also didn't finish Blood Meridian the first time I read it, and then I came back and read it again after, Dostoevskying for a few months, and it just hooked me instantly. Like, the prose made sense. I could read between the lines better, and that's something that comes with experiencing literature more. I think that that's probably the greatest reason to keep reading and keep pushing through some of these great works. The order in which you do it is a person to person thing. But I finally made my way around to Southern literature again after Blood Meridian, and I began with William Faulkner's Light in August. Um, and I got to tell you, this book was a showstopper for me because, unlike Dostoevsky works, where I've talked about in the past, translation is an enormous differentiator. Whereas the cats and the Paviar and Volokhonsky sound really robotic and almost plasticky feeling when you read them, versus Cats kind of tries to put it in a vernacular that we as Americans can understand. Being a Southerner and reading Faulkner, that was never an issue. I think that the biggest thing that I got from Light in August by William Faulkner was the sheer immersion of it. I mean, I could read the book in the accents without even trying because I had met people that talked like this before, and I still meet them every day. Him describing some of the personas and some of the idiosyncrasies of certain, side characters that would come in and go made immediate sense to me. And I think that that removed the intellectual and just experiential barrier that I feel is not present for a lot of Americans when we read foreign literature. Even if it's a great translation, we will never be able to experience Dostoevsky in the original fluent Russian unless we, go do a, PhD in Russian language and Russian literature at the same time. Then we might be able to, but we still don't have babushkas and yadushkas that we can, pair characters with, unlike some of the books from our own homeland. So the biggest thing about this book for me was the immersion. And I think that if you're an American and haven't read Faulkner because you may have heard whatever you may have heard, it might be difficult. Light in August is a great entry point because he doesn't write in an extremely esoteric style. Like Sound and the Fury, I've heard, is very difficult for some people to understand. This book is written almost like a novel. I mean, it is a novel, but you can follow it. I'm confident that 99% of readers can follow this book pretty well. He does dabble in some stream of consciousness, but I think that that deepens the immersion, especially because if you can read back 2 lines, I had to read back like maybe 4 or 5 times. But once I did, it was, I went from 60% understanding to 110% from that one read back. So, absolutely one of the most immersing. This was absolutely one of the most immersing books that I've ever read. And I think that some of the themes of this book, just to cover it pretty quickly, is the impact of the Civil War on the American South in particular. I think that we have since moved past this, and it's a good thing that we have. But I think that when he wrote this book in 1930, and I assume the setting is about 1930 because there's cars, but also a lot of the less economically advantaged people drive mules and carts still, or walk. So it's early 1900s. And, the Civil War was just like these people's parents had fought in the Civil War, many of them. The people that were adults during this time, like my age, their fathers and, uncles would have been Civil War veterans. And their society was completely wrecked overnight. And the whole social order changed. The whole economic order changed. People that had, tools and equipment, one day they did. Then they came back home and their mules had been killed in a battle. Their plows had sometimes been broken or burned by the troops coming through, moving on the march to the sea. This was really a devastated region, and it had a lot of scars of resentment from that, but also scars from, being in battles and watching your friends' legs amputated by a cannonball and things, And it doesn't go into like extreme detail about that, but in a lot of the male characters in this book, when the Civil War is mentioned, Faulkner, again, coming back to immersion, you can pick up that he's getting at that without him saying it explicitly. So it's just a really, really deeply immersing book in that regard. And that scarring of the South's character is very, very apparent in this book. Which brings me to the other really, really prominent feature of this book, and that is the impact of one generation upon the next, and how people at the end of that line or the current strain in that thread deal with it. All of the main characters that are followed in this book have some kind of event, I'm not going to spoil it, in their lives that brings them their paths all kind of cross in one crisis point. And some of these people kind of recede into, resentment and just being completely sour and vindictive in their thoughts and words and actions. Some people kind of fall back into this fantasy of who they think they are based on their ancestors, and they almost live a farce of what they think their ancestors were. And some people keep getting smacked in the chin over and over and over again, but keep coming back for more because it's the right thing to do, or because they just have that determination in them. I mean, there's 4 or 5 characters that kind of interweave, 3 of them being the main characters, 2 kind of tertiary characters that still have good chunks dedicated to their development. And I think that the character play in this book is excellent in that I call them dropbacks because I'm not a literary scholar, but the, subheadings where he goes back and explains the backstory of, so-and-so's grandfather and then their father, and then he jumps back to them in the present. It's so well done. The immersion is incredible, and you really feel like you took part in these people's lives for the roughly 2-week span that the primary action of this book takes place in. So yeah, I would recommend, if you're going to read William Faulkner, you should definitely start with Light in August. It's my first Faulkner book. I did not feel any barriers to understanding. I didn't feel like it was too heavy or too esoteric for me to understand. In fact, the opposite. I thought it was so immersive that I am fighting the urge to just order another one on Amazon right now and read the next hardest book, which I'm probably going to read As I Lay Dying next, before I get into Absalom, and The Sound and the Fury. and some of his other short stories and stuff. But let me know in the comments if you've read Light in August. Let me know where you appraise Faulkner in your canon of American literature among the Steinbecks and the Hemingways and the other authors that are in the Cormac McCarthy's. Goodness gracious. I'm not ready to stack rank them, but they each do what they do very well. And I think that Faulkner stands alone in his accurate and honest portrayal of the American South. He doesn't sugarcoat things, he doesn't glorify things that need not be glorified, but he does propose perspectives and really invites the reader to see the issues through the eyes of people that they might just immediately write off as backwards or ignorant. And I think that's something that very few authors in today's world and back then could do. So yeah, that's just my quick synopsis of Light in August, what I thought about it, what I took away from it. And I hope you all enjoy. I hope this helps you if you're thinking about reading it. All right. See y'all.